Welcome to the Whiskey Congress. Honest, open talk dedicated to speaking the truth to those who are open to hearing it. Black, white, right, left. Most importantly, honest, bold, and fueled by good whiskey. In Whiskey Veritas, we are Whiskey Congress. Join the evolution.
Whiskey Congress is back in session after a bit of a hiatus and after a while without my friend Steve in town. So he's here. Steve and I are together in the Cleveland studio.
Look at that.
How about that?
How about it?
We could do a recap of what's going on in the world of Steve, but let's do that off air because I don't know that's safe for public consumption.
That's not bad.
Okay, good. So before we were supposed to get together last time, we were talking about the possibility of Trump being indicted. He has now been indicted.
Yep.
Is that a good thing?
It depends, right? This has been out there for a while. The indictment stems from his hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and the other woman. And it's not the fact that he paid them. It's how he showed that transfer of money.
Right?
And that's an important distinction because, in this age of sound bites and headlines, like people aren't really digging into the details. And so I think it's important because the narrative from the other side, from Trump supporters, is, that he didn't do this and it wasn't a crime and it's not a crime to have an affair, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, look, that's not what is being looked at here. What's being looked at is how did he report that money when he was in a campaign for President of the United States. And we have campaign finance laws. And while people want to say, plenty of people, make these mistakes or do these sort of things and don't, well, that's not necessarily true. If you remember, what's his name? John Roberts, right?
Chief Justice John Roberts?
No, not John Roberts. I'm sorry. He ran for president.
Oh, John Edwards.
John Edwards,
yes.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. John Edwards, yes. John Edwards got in trouble for, violating campaign finance laws, and other people have as well. Now, it should also be noted that this is specific to the state of New York. These aren't federal charges. It's a 34-count indictment. So there could be a lot there. Now, I put out on Twitter that I want to be very cautious with this because I think, look, on the one hand, you've got Democrats and every people are rejoicing and saying rule of law, blah, 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 blah. And then you've got the other side saying, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. They're just coming after Trump because they don't like him and they want to attack him. And there's a lot of truth and there's a lot of bullshit in all of that and what's being said on either side. And this isn't a both sides sort of thing. I think we have to look at it. There's more to it than just we have to uphold the law. And I mean, you're talking about a former president of the United States. You're talking about a guy who's very divisive. You're talking about a guy who's been around, who we've known for 40 years at least, right? And he, his claim to fame is, these real estate developments and these land deals. I think people are familiar with, the situation in Atlantic City and the bankruptcy. And he definitely skirts around the edge of the law when it comes to how he deals with his finances. Now, that's not unique to large-scale developers and people, high-level, high-income, high-earning business people in New York and around the country and around the world. There are tax loopholes. There are different things that you can do, and people take advantage of them, and they hire really good lawyers and accountants to bring them right up to the edge, right, without breaking the law. And sometimes the law gets broken, and then the question is, really, do they get caught? How often they get caught? And then how that sort of goes down. And people defending Trump are saying, well, people do this all the time, and they don't come after those people like they do Trump. Trump is being persecuted, and it's unfair. And what I'll say to the people that are crying about Trump's persecution is that, look, Trump loves to be the center of attention, right? He loves to be the guy in the middle with the spotlight. He loves to see that, right? He it's known that if you say nice things about him, if you kneel to him and proverbially kiss the ring, he will be much more appreciative of you in his own way, because he loves to have his ego stroked, right? And so Trump goes out and he says things, he does things, he makes a grand show out of everything. Everything is a big production. He likes the attention. And what I'll say to that is, when you like to be the center of attention and you love to tell it like it is and just be real direct with people, there are going to be those that like it and those that don't. So when you draw that attention to yourself, right, you have all the people who love you, but then there are the people who don't. And when you're in a position where you're running for president of the United States and you're a billionaire, you draw in that additional scrutiny. Because there are plenty of very, very wealthy people out there, millionaires and billionaires, who we never see in the news. We never see in the spotlight. I know a couple very, very wealthy people from the Youngstown area who go out of their way to stay out of the media, out of the news. They literally pay people to make sure that their net worth doesn't make the Forbes list and that they aren't, that people don't know how much money they have, because they don't want that scrutiny, right? Not because they've done anything wrong, although a couple.
Yeah, well, you say Youngstown.
But that's how they operate, right? Like, so this idea that, and they do that to avoid the scrutiny that Trump is getting, right? The more you're out there, the more you're showing your face, the more you're flaunting your wealth. Jet with your name on it, not just any jet, right? Not just a little Cessna or something like that, but you're talking about a 747 jet with your name across it. Multiple buildings from New York, Atlantic City to Vegas with your name on it. A rally just for a rally, right? Like, you're not necessarily running for president, but you want to gather as many people as you can in the largest venue that you can, so you could go on and on and on about all the things that you like and you dislike. You can talk shit about people, you can do this and that, and you draw that attention to yourself, it's going to draw scrutiny, right? And so this idea that he's being persecuted unfairly more than anyone else in the history of the world, according to him, is bullshit.
That's fair. I will say this. I agree with everything you just said. And if he did not have a spotlight, then this may not be prosecuted. Because, he's saying it's a witch hunt. Okay, but you're a witch. Well, like what he's being accused of, it seems pretty clear he did. So you're not a victim of wrongful prosecution. You just might not be a target typically in Manhattan for doing what you did, because you're not a public figure. And I do think Alvin Bragg, thank you. Alvin, I do think he's trying to make a name for himself. Sure. And going after Trump makes a name for you. Just like you want to take down Al Capone makes a name for you. Yep. It doesn't mean he didn't do it. And it doesn't mean this is the biggest crime he's ever committed. It's, here's what we can get you for. And the victim card is just not working for me. And
with that, now as a prosecutor, you do need to be careful, right? And you're not supposed to lead with your emotions and your gut. You're supposed to follow the law.
Yeah.
But that being said, look, we know that Trump paid Stormy Daniels off, right? Like, that's not up for debate, right? Like, I mean,
now it is, because apparently now he's saying nothing ever happened, and we've got a great first lady. He's denying. I mean, look, dude.
Okay,
denied.
but let's aside from Trump's spin, we know that you wrote the check for $130,000. We know that it went from you to Stormy Daniels, right?
And Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels, and you to Michael Cohen.
But the question is, how was that handled during your campaign? How did you report it? How did you show it? And there are laws on this. This is why, going back to George Santos or George whatever his name is, he is being investigated for campaign finance improprieties. Like I said, John Edwards, going back, he was found guilty of, and there are plenty of politicians who have got sucked into this, some being more flamboyant than others, but this at that particular aspect isn't uncommon. In terms of, is this a good thing or is it a bad thing, to your original question, I don't know. And I think that, Bragg and the state of New York do need to tread lightly because, look, our democracy is now at risk, right? And not that it hasn't been really since, people say
January
Trump.
6th.
Well, people say, like just Trump in general, and I would argue that the Tea Party really sort of set this off. But, and here's the thing. With him being a former president, I'm sorry, he's not a normal citizen. And you do have to look at it a little bit different. And people want to go to, no one's above the law. Yeah, I'm sorry, they are. We know this, right? There are some people that the legal system is just different for them, and it's not fair, and it's not right, and everything's supposed to be equal across the board. It's not. So let's stop pretending that it is. And so if he did these things, so be it. And go ahead and prosecute him. But you better have a strong case. You better have crossed your T's and dotted your I's, and you bring this case because you have the evidence to prove what you're alleging. Because if you don't, not only does he walk, but that shifts so much energy and power towards Trump, and it already has, and we're only at the grand jury indictment stage, right? We're not at pretrial, we're not at trial, we don't have a verdict, and the people who support him are already rallying, right? And the talking heads are already in spin mode, and there are, conservative commentators that just because of the indictment are stirring the pot of, well, this is going to lead to civil war and blah, 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 and this is an attack on American freedoms, and if they could do it to Trump, they could do it to you, and this is a move of a dictator, and all that stuff is out there. And is that bullshit? Yeah, sure. But the problem is that when you have the type of support that Trump has, whether you view those statements as true or false, like that kind of has to go out the window, because if people believe it and they buy into it, and the fury starts to grow and mount, right? Then we saw what happened on January 6th. Trump said, "Come and support me, and let's show them what we got, and we're not going down without a fight." And then it turns into what it turns into. Like, look, he when he found out that he was going to be indicted, he gets on his own social media, on Truth Social, and starts telling people, "Come to Mar-a-Lago or come to New York, and don't let them take me in without a fight, and come and support me, and tell them this is BS and everything else." If you get a mob of even 500 or 1,000 people or 3,000, 10, 20, however many you get, this is New York. True, they do have plenty of police, but are they going to be able to really contend with 1,000 pissed off people, right? That are angry because their dear leader is they feel is being ushered into a kangaroo court. I just, I don't know. And again, it goes back, Trump playing the victim card. Talking about his illegal, talking about how the election was stolen, and now they're out to get him. And again, I go back to, look, you brought the attention and the spotlight on yourself. When you decide that you're going to run for president, you come down the gold escalator and you make a big deal about it, and you go in and you start talking about Muslims and Mexicans not sending their best and all these things that you're going to do. You and I off air were talking about the movie American Gangster.
Right? Yes, we were.
And thinking about that, what gets Frank Lucas on the radar of Richie the detective?
The fancy fur coat.
The fancy fur coat.
At the Ali fight.
At the Ali fight, sitting front row. He had seats in front of Joe Louis, right?
Right.
That was, and then what did he say?
Joe Louis' girl.
Right. What did he say? He said, Richie says...
You paid for it.
No. Oh. Richie says, "Who's that? Who's that guy? Anybody know who this guy is?" Right? And for Trump, his entire presidency and campaign basically threw on the fur coat with the matching fur hat and sat in the front row of the Ali fight
But there's a huge difference, though. That's
difference.
the one time that he stepped out of.
Yes.
Right? His whole thing was stay low key.
Exactly.
Trump's whole thing has been stick me in the front row.
Well, but what I'm saying is, when you stick yourself in the front row, right?
Yeah.
Frank did it once,
and
right?
it burned it.
And it brought his whole thing down, right? Trump is has basically made a career.
What sucks is most people don't know how good a movie this is.
Well, it's amazing. But, Trump has made a career of being in the spotlight, but then he steps into the ring of
Politics,
and running for president. And all of a sudden, that scrutiny, before it goes to, I just can't stand this guy, blah, 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 right? But he's not president, and people have other fish to fry, and there's plenty of other business people who do the shit. But then you run for president. That's a game changer. That's Trump sitting in the front row. Then everything he said while running for president and as president is basically him throwing on the fur coat, right? It's just like, all right, now we're going to look at you, right? You got all these people praising you. We're not here to praise you. Now we're going to do a deep dive. You want to run the country? Let's see exactly who it is that wants this particular job. And this is the result of that. Now you could say that's not fair and they should look at every business. Oh, okay. But again, this is reality.
Fair is a bullshit word.
Right.
And I 100% agree that had he done what he intended to do in 2016, and I don't think I'm stretching here, I think he wanted to be the defeated candidate who then started a Trump-based news organization with Roger Ailes, and he wanted to be able to say, had you elected me, unlike this criminal Hillary Clinton, you'd have gotten this greatness and great America, blah, blah. And then he fucking won. He didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I can. Because
is that even a debate now?
There's plenty of if you remember at the time, he had tried to buy an NFL team, and the NFL said,
and the Buffalo Bills, by the way,
your squad.
Yep.
And the NFL said, no, we don't care.
Well, no, they said, show us your finances. Yeah. And the NFL, and he went, no, they don't want to do that.
And they knew what he was going to say because they didn't want him, right? Like, mind you, he had tried this before in the 80s, which is where the USFL came from, where, he sues, they sue, and then he ends up winning and ends up getting $1 out of it and that whole thing. He tries to buy the Bills, and then he needs to show his finances, and he tells them to kick rocks. And you have all that, but he's such a divisive figure, right? And he puts himself in these situations, and for so long, it has worked out for him. But at that point in time, he's trying to get an NFL team. That doesn't work out. He had his show on NBC, The Apprentice, and everything else, because there's arguments that he was trying to go for a bigger deal with NBC. So if he's a former presidential candidate, he can go back to the table and say, look, people, look at all the attention that I got. People are going to want to see me. I want more money out of NBC. There was talk about him starting, his own social network, Fox News, all that. So all those things were in play. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. The intention wasn't to win. The intention was to drum up his status even more so that it could drive more money into his pocket. Then he ends up winning. Steve Bannon jumps in as his support man and helps sort of guide the campaign and really sort of gives him a more of a direction as a candidate. Starts to give him play on Breitbart on their news network on Sirius satellite, and all of a sudden he wins this thing, and then he just keeps rolling and says, "All right, how far can we take it?" And it ends up being financially beneficial for him, but he's got to deal with some of the skeletons in his closet, the Stormy Daniels and the other girl, and all these other things. And he's able to sort of navigate his way through it without getting a lot of trouble, right? Without any actual recourse. But then once he's out of office, now all of a sudden these people are just like, hey, we didn't forget about you, and you like attention, so we're giving you that attention. And now that you're not protected by the office of the presidency, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to dig in. So New York is the first one. There's still Georgia. There's still the federal investigation regarding January 6th. So by the end of the year, he could be fighting on 3 different fronts to basically keep himself out of jail.
And that's one of the things that bothers me the most about this is what he's being charged with now, to me, is like the least of the things that I think he should be challenged or penalized for. I mean,
but they're all three different, right? Like one's New York,
separate entities. Understood,
right? In New York, and if I'm a prosecutor in New York, and you come to me and say, well, Georgia, their thing is a little bit more serious than yours, so why don't you? If I'm Alvin Bragg, I'm like, who the fuck are you? And why? I don't care, right? He broke laws.
You do your job, I'll do mine,
right? Like he broke laws here, so if we find him guilty first and we sentence him, and you guys find him guilty and you sentence him, then we'll figure out how to get him to you to serve his time or whatever. But like this is like New York is my my responsibility.
Yeah. No, I think Alvin Bragg is probably saying, I want to be the guy that took down Trump. I do think that's a political motivated decision on his part.
And he's got to be careful.
And he's got to be careful, but it also doesn't mean he's wrong.
Right.
Right? I mean, again, Al Capone went to prison for the rest of his life for income tax evasion. He was involved in, I don't know how many murders, how many awful things, but they got him for income tax evasion. And that's what this is. But that doesn't mean the law is wrong. It looks like he... And one thing I wanted to do this, I kept meaning to do a whiskey shot for the show and say, there's people saying the statute of limitations had expired. That is not accurate. So the statute of limitations was 6 years, and this occurred more than 6 years ago. But the law in New York says if you move out of the state, then that extends. Mm-hmm. And he moved to Washington, D.C., because that's where the president lives. So,
well, technically, he changed his residence to.
I'm being Florida. Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, he moved out of the state. So the statute of limitations argument is bullshit. Whether this is a political prosecution or persecution, whatever, make that argument if you want. But
I mean, look, listen, just because this is happening in New York, it doesn't really impact anything that's happening in Georgia or with the January 6th investigations, right? And if Alvin Bragg has the evidence that these crimes occurred, again, it's a 34-count indictment. It's sealed. I haven't seen them. I haven't read them. I also don't know New York law, right? Not all states have the same laws and everything else, so I don't know enough about New York state law to be able to start to speculate on the various counts and everything else and the allegations. Once I see them, I can, look at it with a little bit more, information, knowledge, whatever. But what I will say is that if the evidence is strong enough where he believes that he can get a conviction, then I would say there's no reason for him to not pursue that conviction or pursue that prosecution. But the reality is we are talking about a former president, and while people want to go to the no one's above the law, which I agree, we do need to look at the stability of our democracy, right? Now, some people say Trump going down for everything he's done wrong helps to stabilize our democracy. And then others are saying, like, look, if you're going to get him on petty bullshit, then that's going to destabilize it, because then they're going to go after Biden for petty bullshit, right? And we already know that that the conservative side has a huge hard-on for Hunter Biden and all his bullshit. And they're not necessarily wrong, right? But if you're going to go ahead and go through with it, then you need to make sure that you do it right. And like I said earlier, cross the T's, dot the I's, have the evidence presented in a way that gets the job done, and get the prosecution and deal with the after effects. And I would say the same thing in Georgia, right? And I think Georgia actually has a murkier case because it's going to be how people interpret what was said, right? With Trump, it's with New York, it's how was the money reported, right? You've got the documents that were submitted to the campaign.
Financial records.
Right, like you've got all that stuff. You can show that. You can compare it to what the law is, and if he did it right, you got nothing. If he didn't, then you got something. And so, but you still have to bring it home because it's going to go in front of a jury. And if you're going to bring these charges, then you need to be able to win. You just need to be able to win.
That's something that we've talked about a bunch of times on the show and off, that when you deal with high-level cases, all of these prosecutors are so hesitant to swing and miss.
Yeah,
they do. If they can't dot every I, cross every T, and win, they don't want to do anything. They want a 99. They want a Grenada, to quote Wolf of Wall Street. They want an absolute slam dunk case.
And here's the reason why: it's not just their records, their reputation, and everything else. That's part of it.
That matters.
But at the same time, look, in some of these instances, if you got a guy who you know is dirty, but he's good at hiding it, and you charge him with X, and you don't get it, then a lot of times it's a one-shot deal, right? Because like he's found not guilty, then you can't bring those charges again, right? Now, if there's new evidence that resurfaces, okay, then yes, maybe. But how often does that happen?
I mean, that's a double jeopardy thing, right?
There's risk there. So if you've got a guy who's dirty and you don't have a great case, then no, you don't bring that case because you don't want to bring a case just for the sake of doing it because of your ego or whatever. You also don't want to lose a case because of ego, but at the same time, you have to be there's tactics that you need to think about and that you need to use to when you come to make that decision, right? Because it's prosecutorial discretion, and prosecutors look at cases every day where they have evidence of a crime committed. They have to think about the bigger picture and. Yes, there's evidence that a crime was committed, but is there enough to prove these allegations and win in court? I have to convince 12 people that aren't familiar with the law, that don't have a legal background or experience in this particular field, that are going to have varying degrees of education, political affiliation, life experiences, all these things. There are a lot of variables that are out of the prosecutor's control that they have to take into consideration when they're bringing a case. And if that case isn't strong enough to win, if it's kind of, man, we might be able to pull it off if we get the right jury and it's the right time of the whatever, right? Like you can't go in with the major prosecution that way.
And if you're trying to make a name of yourself on I'm the guy who took down Trump and you swing and miss, you're now the guy who looks like the guy.
Because when you're dealing with these high net worth individuals, right? They've got resources, a lot of resources, way more than the average person. And so bringing a case against someone with those sort of resources, you have to be careful. It's not like picking up average Joe off the street who...
You can't throw him in Rikers Island and let him sit there for 2 years and figure out...
Or just the fact that the person... Like, look, I don't have the money to go out and get a high-priced attorney with multiple people looking at every different in and out of the law to figure out if I can get out of this thing or not, right? If they're just picking you up off the street... then they're going to throw the charges at you. You hire an attorney. Your attorney's going to do the best that he can, but it's him, right? And maybe his legal assistant against the state, right? Whereas with Trump, it's not just an attorney. It's not just one law firm, right? Like, I mean, you could have three high-powered law firms working on his defense.
Now, the lawyers he's hired does draw some scrutiny. Well, like Rudy Giuliani and Michael Cohen are lawyers.
Sidney Powell. Right. I mean, like, look, even
because he's fucked over enough lawyers in his life.
Right.
It's tough.
I mean, you take all that into account.
Yeah.
As a prosecutor, and that's how you come to a decision on if you're going to do something or not.
I want to throw something at you, though, because you and I have kind of parried over the term me calling Trump a cult leader, and then he goes and does a fucking rally in Waco, Texas, on the 30-year anniversary of the Branch Davidian. And it's funny to me. They said it's a 30-year anniversary, and I thought, okay, is it to the day? That took 51 days. That took almost 2 months. Mm-hmm. Now it's 30 years ago.
Yep.
But it took a long time, and I remember that happening. I was a senior in college or junior in college. And I mean, it was just a constant source of jokes. And now I've, as an adult, revisited that whole thing. And what a fucking mess. The federal government deserves a ton of blame for how they handled that situation. Having said that, David Koresh was a fucking cult leader, a crazy-haired psycho who got people to die for him. And then Trump shows up there.
Right. It's just, and it wasn't just that he was the leader of a cult. Right? Like a cult in and of itself isn't necessarily illegal.
No,
right?
It's not illegal.
It's what they were doing inside that compound. That compound that had raised the attention of the authorities. And like you said, federal government completely fumbles it and fucks that up. But it doesn't change the fact that David Koresh was a criminal.
Correct.
Who had hurt a lot of people. And was very manipulative and cost a lot of people their lives with help from the federal government and their handling of the situation. Trump oddly enough, and my back and forth with you on whether it's a cult or not
is volume.
It's not. It's right. It's, to me, this is bigger than a cult, right? It's just, yeah, you're right, but this has grown into a movement, a revolution of sorts, of people who are just devoid of facts and reality and spin it, and they've got power of the media, they've got political power, all the way from the top all the way to the bottom. And it's just, to me, it's just like cult undersells, understates what it is.
I understand.
That's my only argument.
I understand, and I've tried to be fair to you on that you're saying it's a matter of scope or scale,
yes,
not just the term. But then I think there's some big cults out there. There's people who call the Catholic Church a cult. I might be one of them.
And agreed. And I think even with the Catholic Church or the Scientology and all that other shit, like, I agree.
Mormonism.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
fucking
again,
dude.
To me, all that stuff is there's got to be
we need a new word,
right? We need a new word that's bigger, right? And that's
my
only argument.
Again, I don't want to spar with you over terminologies other than to say that they are not exempt from this cult mentality.
We need to step into our ring.
No, we don't. I'm old.
Fair enough.
I've been creaking getting out of bed for the last couple days. You know what though?
No, we're not going to do that.
All right. On second thought, it's not a great idea. All right.
Jim will be typing his answers today, folks.
We have not talked about your boy Ron DeSantis, who we've talked about him a lot.
The last time I was on the show, we actually did.
We did, but that was like 3 weeks ago,
right?
Man.
I know.
And to me, you and I have traded some text messages, and you've been saying the whole time that his smart move is just lay back, let Trump do his thing. Trump's now calling him Tiny D because Trump can't talk about a candidate without bringing up dick size, which is pathetic and hilarious at the same time.
Right.
But if you could see how much you're trying not to laugh out loud, it would be great. But DeSantis is...
Well, I keep thinking about the Stormy Daniels description of his dick.
Did you ever see the tweet? Did you send the tweet? When Trump wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. No, he used a 3-inch one. Did you see that?
Yes.
Stormy Daniels is... All right. That's such a funny thing because we all know what happened.
Yeah.
He didn't deny it for the longest time. It was always, horse face, blah, 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 whatever. And now he's literally getting away with saying it never happened. Like, we know it fucking happened, dude. And yet,
listen,
and that's cult. That's you can just change reality based on your words.
And my argument is, look, whether he banged her or not, ultimately, we do know you paid her. Right? Now, you could say it's extortion and blah, 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 because now they're going, well, it was extortion all along. You never did. Okay, fine. But what we do know is that you paid her. The question is, how'd you report it? How'd you show it? And if you didn't do it the right way, that's a crime. And you're dealing with that now. So, but going back to Ron DeSantis, yeah, I mean, I laid out his plan for him. So if he listens to the show, he's been, following pretty closely and doing everything that I said. But, it's interesting because he came out, I think, yesterday and said that he wouldn't extradite Trump if it came to it. Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, he doesn't have to, right? It's not like he's not required to, but he wanted to make that statement, and that was because he knows that a lot of his base, if and when he does declare that he's running, are still in that Trump camp. And he doesn't want to alienate them, which is why I said all along is that he was going to sit back. He was going to wait to really get into it with Trump until he absolutely had to, right? And while he did do an interview with, I believe, Sean Hannity or somebody not that long ago. It was somebody in that sort. Yeah. He took some small jabs at Trump, but he really hasn't come out against them. And really has talked more about look, I'm here to govern. I'm here to run the state of Florida. I want to support, the right people, and I don't want to kneel to the woke left and all that other stuff, right? So he says most of the right things. Takes some small jabs at Trump, but ultimately does, he doesn't wade too deep.
His best one was, I don't know the proper, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know the proper etiquette for paying off a porn star, but that's not what I'm about.
Right.
Like,
You know what I mean?
Like, put on a tee.
Yeah, I mean, and
God.
so it's interesting, but why did you put him on the board?
Because I think he's a danger to himself and only to himself. I think
DeSantis, you mean?
Yeah, DeSantis. Okay. If he shuts the fuck up, he wins. The more he exposes himself, the worse he is, because he is, like you've said this, he's smart, he's educated, he's got the credentials. He's also a raging douchebag.
Yep.
And the less you see of raging douchebag and the more you see of Harvard-educated, Yale-educated, yada, 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 the better he looks. And if he's just the guy that Trump's attacking and sits back, he's in great shape.
But
when he's actually in public, he does not come off well.
Yeah, but a lot of people are just, and a lot of people say that, but Trump doesn't come off well, and he's doing
Trump's
just fine.
charismatic, though.
Yeah, but is he? I mean,
he is, Steve. He is.
Okay.
And charismatic isn't necessarily. David Koresh was charismatic. People followed him.
And I get it, right? So was Bill Clinton, so was Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, but Bush wasn't, right? But, you know.
Well, was he? I mean, kind of
especially the first Bush, you know.
George H.W. was not charismatic.
I mean, he was about as charismatic as his fucking
my shoe, yes.
Gatorade bottle. But
Gatorade, brought to you by Whiskey Congress.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and measure charisma, you know, but what I will say is...
It's what's become the main characteristic you need to succeed in our politics, unfortunately.
But also, DeSantis is smart enough to know, and he's... listen, he was in a tight race with Andrew Gillum for the governor, right? The governorship, and he barely wins. Andrew Gillum goes completely off the rails, and whatever
in a hotel room
happened there. But
dead male prostitute.
He wasn't dead.
Did he not die?
No, he just OD'd.
Okay,
and they brought him back.
I'm so sorry.
You know, Andrew Gillum had that sort of situation, so he disappears out of nowhere. But then, you know, he wins. You know, DeSantis ends up winning, going away in that next election, and he's got the governorship. And listen, the support for him is there, right? We know that, right? Is it enough to win the election? Is it enough to beat Trump? That part we don't know, but I don't think he's done anything to really hurt himself to this point. And a lot of people are saying he's not going to sell nationally. People aren't going to like. I'm like, look, it's still this is a different sort of battle, right? And DeSantis doesn't necessarily need to be Barack Obama charismatic or Bill Clinton charismatic. Like he's not going to swoon the panties off the ladies, but he does know how to push the right buttons. He knows how to push the right levers, right? Like he leans on the wokeism, and he's got the track record in how he governs the state of Florida that he can point to, and he does know the right things to say. And you could sit there and say he's not going to come off well. Well, the thing is, the things that he's doing in Florida that people are all up in arms about, they're doing in Texas. They're doing in Iowa. They're doing in North Dakota, South Dakota, whatever.
Ohio,
right? Like so. His policies are there, and he'll be able to point to those. Like, look, we did it first, and then Texas did it, and then this state did it, and then that state did it. And when he goes places, he has support. So this idea that he's not going to sell well, and he's not charismatic, and he's a raging douche, and all that stuff, I agree with all of it. That's fine. But the reality is that people still buy into him. And if it seems that Trump isn't a viable candidate, they're not going to all of a sudden come back down to earth and shift to Nikki Haley and shift to your boy in Maryland.
Who, by the way, let's say it, Larry Hogan, my boy in Maryland, has said he's not running.
Oh, he did?
He has officially declared he is not running because he didn't want to take it away from the... I honestly, I thought that was a setup when you started down this road. No? You didn't hear it?
I had
Larry Hogan has said, I'm not running, to which I went, motherfucker. Like, if you wanted this guy to vote Republican, that was your guy. No, not gonna happen.
I won't
gloat?
I won't gloat until I told you so, and he didn't have a chance in hell. But you know,
that's your version of gloating until he didn't have a chance in hell. But to close out DeSantis, he's riding a wave. He's riding the Trump wave without being Trump, and that's what people love about him. Is he's got all that shit that I love getting said. but I don't have the goofy orange hair and the 3-inch dick poking Stormy Daniels. I couldn't help but sneak that in there because it was funny. Either could he. But
That's about all he could do.
Apparently. And dude, all right, I want to move on from this, but I would say, when you start calling a porn star that you fucked horseface and say you're not into her, that just makes you look like a complete scumbag. Well, I wouldn't fuck horseface. Well, you did. We know you did. And now you're like, we've seen video of her performing said acts. Someone in this room may or may not have DM'd Miss Daniels at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
I know I did.
I know you put on the show, and I wasn't calling you out.
To come on the show, not for...
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. Well, I'll DM her for the other reason. I can give her 3.5. All right, anyway, moving on. Marjorie Taylor Greene was giving a speech the other day, and someone attacked her by blowing a whistle. Literally blowing a whistle. She's trying to talk, and someone is disrupting her nonsense with shrill noise, which basically to me was shrill noise trying to take over shrill noise. And she called this a criminal act and wanted this person arrested. MTG, okay. Let's talk about free speech, sweetheart.
Also, I mean, we could also talk about her own behavior at the State of the Union address, where she
yelled out and
screamed the entire time that Joe Biden was talking. So there's that.
Hypocrisy and rationality don't come into play anymore. Come on now. But anyway, Marjorie Taylor Greene is becoming such a fucking joke.
Becoming?
Has been a fucking joke for so long.
Since we learned her name.
And it still works.
Yeah.
Why?
Which is why I'm sitting here telling you, like, people are like, oh, well, Ron DeSantis, people across the country, they're not going to like him. Marjorie Taylor Greene is pulling in money from all over the country, and she's a complete and utter dipshit about as charismatic as the bottom of my ball sack. Right, like, so don't give me the...
Oh, your ball sack. No, sorry.
It is freshly shaved. I will tell you that.
I opened that door. My fault.
Well, you walked into it.
I did not walk into your ball sack. I walked into the conversation.
Keep talking, buddy. That statement can become true.
Okay. I'm
not above a teabag. Absolutely not.
I am above being teabagged willingly. All right, moving on. Yes. So
I'm
that's
going to get you drunk.
That'll be a challenge.
But... No, but I mean, like going back to the charisma thing, you can't say she's charismatic at all, right? And yet, look at the support.
She's a firebrand. I mean, you can give her credit for being loud.
So is Ron DeSantis.
Yeah. Oh, I'd actually say Ron DeSantis. All right, go on. Because I don't want to call him charismatic because he's really not.
Right. I mean, that's the thing and all I'm saying is, like, it's not like the whole charisma thing on that side of the aisle. It is, it's beneficial. It's beneficial to anyone who actually has it, but they don't necessarily need it. And their brand is selling across the country, whether Democrats or people, progressives or people on the left or independent or whatever, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, there are people who are buying what DeSantis and Marjorie Taylor Greene and these others are selling because they want to. Right? Like they don't need to be convinced. They just they want someone to say the things that they want to hear, and they don't care about the delivery. If you say the things that these people want to hear, they will support you. That's it.
I wish I could argue. I've got no ground. I was going to say the exact words you said, that you say what they want to hear, and suddenly I'm hearing it from someone in power. They must be capable because, after all, they're in Congress. They're the governor. They're whatever. And we've had this conversation 100 times on the show,
right? Like Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't in Congress. She, was a CrossFitter that owned a construction company or whatever, and just started saying whatever, and she blew up into what she is now.
A two-term Congress member.
Exactly. And so, and again, when it comes to DeSantis, and you want to sit there and tell me, well, once he gets on the national stage, people aren't going to like him, and that'll be the end of okay, well, I disagree. And so do the people that are going to support him and pour money into his campaign and vote for him if that's their option. Period, point blank, the end. Tell me I'm wrong all you want. You can deny it all you want. But we know I'm right.
And I don't see Marjorie. Here's a big difference. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a smart human being, not an educated human being, whereas DeSantis is.
She is visibly stupid.
Absurdly stupid.
Visibly,
it hurts me to say this
observably,
because she's white, but
like-
Marjorie Taylor Greene is absurdly stupid.
Either
To
way.
quote Dave Chappelle.
Yes.
All right, man. I want to move on to a few other things. Another death in Russia. In this case, a pop music star. I wish I had his name in front of me. I don't. But he wrote a song, did a song about drowning in a river. And that became the emblem for the anti-Putin movement. And dude drowned in a river. So I want to say, on the record, I would hate to be fucked to death by Russian prostitutes. Because that would be terrible. Please, Vladimir, don't do that to me.
See, the problem
Just in
is,
case.
if it were Vladimir Putin and he had a reason to, he'd probably make that come true, but not in a way that you would want it to be.
All right, well.
Not quite the Russian prostitutes you were thinking, but look,
Vlad the Impaler.
now I'm glad you brought this up because
Are you?
there are look, there are people out there on the conservative right that are vehemently against U.S. support of Ukraine to the point where they are actually saying, like, look, I think Putin's getting a bad rap. I think Putin is the good guy here, and I think that we need to listen to what he's saying. And the media tells us that Putin's bad, right? But is he really bad? It's just like, yeah, he kills his political opposition, and I know that he sells this idea that everything is going great in Russia, but it is not, right? Like, I mean, they got some pretty rough shit going on.
His
over
bank
there.
account's doing great, by the way.
His bank account is doing fantastic, and Vlad, we're looking for investors, so call me.
We can be bought. We can,
Right, I have a price.
comrade, we have.
Yeah, but like all of a sudden, I will come to national or world championships of powerlifting in Russia.
We talked about this, and I said I would go with you. I will not.
The fuck you won't. Once again, I will get your ass drunk and get you on a plane.
Where the fuck am I? You're in Moscow, bitch.
Actually, I think it was in St. Petersburg. But either way.
Forgive me for my wild.
No,
bad
but
behavior.
I mean, I think like you see this, right? And it's in you see it on Twitter, you see it on social media. It hasn't quite made mainstream media, but there are those out there, the conservative talking heads, trying to spin Putin as this again, like trying to spin him in a similar light as to Trump. He's misunderstood and people are mischaracterizing him, and the left is doing this and Joe Biden is doing this to make him look bad because ultimately Joe Biden is a warmonger and he's doing a proxy war in Ukraine and all this other stuff.
Sure.
Look, the whole U.S. proxy war, Ukraine versus Russia, yeah, I buy it, acknowledge it. I think that's a legitimate criticism, observation. We've dumped a lot of money into the Ukraine, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't, right? Because I personally don't think it's a good idea to watch Russia expand. And people want to say, well, you're a hypocrite because the U.S. has gone into Syria and Iran. And I'm like, look, yeah, and you know what? Here's the deal. We're the big bad bully on the block. Now, we have competition, a lot of it now. If you look at what China is doing with Iran and the Middle East and Brazil and Syria and these other countries, and they like China has gone from
and what China's doing in Africa, by the way, which gets no attention at
right,
all.
like and listen, I could go on and on and on about what China is doing right now that is a direct threat to every single person in this country, me, you, across the board, right? I mean, they're trying to get their own currency with these other countries that would stand up against or overstep the dollar. China is getting directly involved with the UN. They're trying to make policy. They're trying to make international law that mimics the laws in China. They're shifting the way that they govern their own people. They're looking for much further international reach than they already have to not only combat the United States, but to completely overtake the United States as the number one world power across the board. The question is, are they trying to broker a peace deal with Russia and Ukraine, or are they just supporting Russia so that Russia takes over and wins? And then if Russia has got more control and power in that region, then they do as well. China is absolutely a fucking threat to everything that we know and love in this country. And going back to Vladimir Putin, this idea of them spinning this as him being the victim and that he's doing the right thing by invading Ukraine and we should stay out of it, that can't be ignored. But this is an example of why Putin is a bad guy, right? You don't know that that guy didn't drown on his own. You don't know that Putin had him killed. Get the fuck out of here, right? Like, are we really doing this?
What was I? What are the?
Right, like what are the like? I mean, like I will give Putin credit for
creativity.
For creativity,
or like, it's not even creativity though, Steve.
Right,
it's like you want to choose how to die. You're Ghostbusters.
Irony.
The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I tried to think of the most innocent thing. Sorry,
weird
reference.
But the point is that listen, Putin isn't a good guy. Putin isn't doing this for. Because he's trying to flush out the Nazis in Ukraine, right? He's doing this to expand his power and control in that region. And you could say, well, it's because of NATO. Okay, sure, fine. Maybe he is doing it because of NATO, right? But that still doesn't mean you cross into another country and just start leveling their infrastructure and their cities and capturing their people and killing their people and everything else, right? Like that's just not how you do it. And if that is how you do it, then I'm sorry, then you should be pushed back against. And the United States has an interest in not allowing Russia to do that and push further into Ukraine. And I stand by it. And now look, again, the amount of money that they're putting into it, considering the issues that we have here, I can listen to that argument as well. But what's more important, like the issues that we have here, we know aren't solved with money. Money helps a great deal, and we need it, but the issues over there, right, are solved with money because the money, we're not just taking and handing them briefcases full of money, right?
We're selling them arms.
Right. We're giving them weapons and tanks and drones and planes and training and there is the humanitarian aspect and, ways to prevent this. All that goes into it. It's not just sending over bales of cash. And that's when wars are expensive for that reason. Listen, I get it. People think that the U.S. needs to stay out of a lot of this shit and focus more on the U.S. I can listen to that argument all day. But at the same time, listen, this is now a global economy, a global socio-political world that we live in because of the internet, because of the ability to travel, and we have foreign interest. And it's ugly, and sometimes it's hypocritical based off the way that we operate, but we are who we are. Right, I'm not going to shy away from it and be like, no, it's not. Yeah, there's nuance and it's different. There are different reasons, and sometimes we were called in to help, whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean that you let Putin run into Ukraine and take over the country. I don't care what you think. That's not good for anybody, especially given the importance of that country and what comes out of there. And that's not me all of a sudden being ultra sensitive to the Ukraine people. The bottom line is there's a lot of shit that comes out of that country that we don't want Russia to have control of.
I mean, jumping nuclear, you're talking about
grain
production?
Talking about grain production, uranium, neon. It's a very resource-rich country that...
Which is why Putin wanted to contain.
Which is why Putin wants control over it, which is why we don't want him to have control over it, and we want Ukraine as an ally.
Yeah. And... I mean, we've been talking about this for over a year because the war has been going on for over a year, and you really have to give credit to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people.
And I'll own it, man. It's gone on 50 weeks longer than I thought it would.
Yeah.
I thought
this first happened, we were like, okay, and we know what happens in 2 weeks.
Right. I mean, it says a lot about the Ukrainian people and their willingness to fight. Yes, a lot of their ability to fight has come from support for the U.S., but also it points to the inability and the ineptness of the Russian military, right? Like, we thought that they were this group of badasses from every movie everybody's ever seen and the way we talked about them.
And you know what?
Come to find out, not so much.
When you sit on your ass for 20 years talking about how great you are and then suddenly get pushed into action, it's a different game.
Now, what I also
I'm
say...
not trying to be
you're not wrong. Right. No, you're right. But here's the thing. I also think that's why China is taking the approach that they're taking. Now, this shit that China is doing has been in the works for years, right? Like, this isn't a response to what's happening in Russia, but they have picked up the pace because they see what's happening with Russia and Russia's inability to win this war on the ground fighting, right? They're seeing the support that the Ukraine is getting, but they're also seeing that the fight that Ukraine is putting up, right? So China is looking at this and saying, do we really want to do this? When's the last time anybody from China has actually fought?
Right.
right?
And
right? Like, when is the last time?
Let's throw shade at America. We thought we could go into Iraq and it would be over in 2 weeks.
Right.
Well, how'd that work out?
Well,
Afghanistan, how'd that work out?
And listen, Iraq, Afghanistan definitely didn't.
Military power was.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, with China, like, listen, our soldiers we know have been out and active all over the world since World War II.
Yeah,
right.
Pretty
World
much.
War I.
Yeah.
We've had soldiers on the ground all over the world training. People want to talk about our military being woke and soft and all that other stuff. I still put our guys up against anybody's, flat out. Right? I mean, like, who?
Yeah,
really?
no.
Right?
Well, I mean, it's our topic, but we also, it's technology. There's a whole bunch more goes into it.
There's all that other, right? You're right. But when it comes to just war tactics, fighting, whatever, like, I put us up against anybody. And I think China is looking at that and saying, like, look, we've got the technology. We've stolen it from all over the world. We've developed our own. We've got more people than anybody else. But are we worth a shit on the battlefield? Right? And I think that they're looking at that and thinking, like, yeah, we're probably pretty good, but Russia's over there getting their asses handed to them. And everybody thought that they were pretty good, too. Yeah. So they're like, maybe there's a more diplomatic way for us to take over the world. Maybe we don't need to go Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe. Maybe we could do it, more in a suit as opposed to a military uniform. So they're going through and getting deeper involved in the UN. They're going through and they're just buying up Africa left and right. They're going through, they're jumping into South America, right? Like, they're trying to pull Mexico away from the U.S. and into their grip, right? And they're trying to do it on a political, financial, economic way, manipulating the markets and all. Like, they're trying to get it to a point where there is no war to fight, right? Because we've just taken over and we didn't have to fire a single missile, right? Or fire a single bullet.
It's one man with a briefcase versus 10 men with a gun.
Exactly. Right?
Is that Godfather 2? I don't know where I stole that
Something
from.
like that, yeah.
All right, man. I don't want to go too long, and there's a few things I really want to talk about. One of them is a story you sent to me that took place in Lorain, Ohio, where 3 young black kids are walking across the street in a residential neighborhood, and they walk into a house, and they are confronted.
Lorain, Ohio is 20 minutes from here, by the way.
Right. All right, so you sent me this video. I watched a video, and it's 3 kids walk across the street. 2 men who are ATF officers approach the house, and they demand the mother send those kids out so they can talk to them. Mm-hmm. And she says, why? And they say, because they were jaywalking. And my first thought was, okay.
Why the fuck does the ATF care
about
kids jaywalking? Right.
We both know at least one ATF officer. You know him better than me. If you told him, we need to do your job, and, oh, by the way, take care of pedestrian crossing violations, you know him better than me, my guess he would say, okay, and go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Now, they create a scene. They challenge this woman, they make these statements, and they say it's because these kids were jaywalking. And then they later claim, well, the way they were walking, it looked like they had guns. I will be the first to admit I've never been trained in law enforcement. If I was worried about a couple of teenage kids having guns and I wanted to discuss this with them, ordering them to come out into the street and challenge me is not the way I would go. If their mom was out in front and they were and I was concerned these kids had guns, I wouldn't say, get these kids out here. I would say, ma'am, I think your kids might be carrying a gun, and A, it's illegal, and B, it's not safe for your kids. Let's you and I work together to get this resolved in a peaceful way. And they could not have fucked this up more.
I agree.
Okay.
I mean, I there's just so much of it that doesn't make sense, right? Initially, they were jaywalking.
Yeah, so you put this on Twitter, right? Because that's I think where I saw it. All right. So follow Steve on Twitter. At Whiskey Congress on Twitter. You'll see it.
So, yeah, I mean, the initial statement that, they were jaywalking. Oh, well, we thought they had guns. And it's just like, your ATF agents, jaywalking, I don't even know if you have the jurisdiction to enforce jaywalking.
Oh, by the way, that neighborhood was residential. Like, if I cross the street in front of my house right now, technically it might be jaywalking. I am in the city of Cleveland. No one would get ticketed for jaywalking on the street. And the street that happened on, which when I first watched
Although you would get a ticket in Lakewood.
I've jaywalked in Lakewood 100 times.
I
never got caught.
I got stopped by an officer for jaywalking.
Yeah, you're black.
I did. It wasn't. I just was I crossed at the crosswalk, but I was outside of it, right? Just trying to get across, and
Okay.
Stay in the crosswalk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But again, federal officers stopping people for jaywalking, like, okay. I have jurisdictional questions about that, and then to flip it and say, oh well, we thought that they had guns. Like, well, if you thought that they had guns, why would you let them go all the way into the house, right?
And why would you try to drag them back out of the house?
Well, and there's just the idea, like, if they have guns and they're in the house, like, do you think that they're going to come out to face two ATF agents, which turned into 12 total officers between the ATF and local Lorain police? Like, that doesn't quite make sense either. Now, look, now the one thing I did think about after you and I talked about this a few days ago, do we have an instance where these kids maybe are known troublemakers and they're known to have illegal weapons? ATF was in the area looking for them, saw them, and opted to confront them. I don't know, right? And that's a possibility, right?
It may be, but it was still handled so badly.
There's a way. There's just a better way to handle it, right? And I know this talking to police officers and federal agents who have this level of experience that from the ATF to the local, like, they all fucking handled it wrong. Right? Like, there's just better ways to go about this. And if you think that it's that pressing of an issue, you handle it much different. If you're unsure or what, like, again, if you really thought that they had weapons and you're trying to get the weapons off the street, again, you're the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. Okay, so be it. But, everything about this felt wrong. There's enough people out there saying, like, who have experience doing this, said they did it wrong. That I feel comfortable saying they did it wrong. And again, like, if these guys are, then you find a way to actually get them with the guns on them, right? You let them go in the house, take the guns off, right? Like, because where it's illegal is, again, with the laws in Ohio with guns, like, if you're over 18, it's going to be tough for even the ATF agents to really say, unless they know that the guns are somehow illegal, right? Like, they're fully automatic, or that they know for a fact that the guns were obtained illegally through an illegal sale or whatever. But if they're over 18, then, like, it's an open carry state. Like, they basically got rid of the requirement for concealed carry. But where you could have an issue is because these were kids, and if you thought that then any gun that they have, just walking down the street, concealed otherwise, is then therefore illegal, where the ATF now has jurisdiction, right? But then, throwing out there, jaywalking, it's like, okay.
Well, and to me, the thing is, if you're trying to make the streets safer, air quoting, then inviting either kids who had guns to come out and confront you, or arm themselves more. If you want to fight, then that's not the way to make things better. I just thought it was handled horribly. Yeah. And I get so annoyed when people say to me, I have friends in law enforcement or whatever, say, well, you've never been trained. You're right. I haven't. But you know what? I could have handled that better. And it's like when a quarterback throws a cross-body pass and goes, gets a pick six, like, I can say that was a dumb pass. Could you have thrown it? No, I couldn't.
And apparently he couldn't either because he got intercepted.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And I want to transition real quick to that because I want your thoughts on Lamar Jackson. We've gone over already. I think the Lamar Jackson situation is just a disaster in so many levels. For him, for the league, I just think it's bad.
Jesus, dramatic. Okay, go ahead. Why?
Because he is being accused by the team that he is going to play for next year unless things change, of being disingenuous. They claim they offered him money and he turned it down. He's saying, no, I wasn't offered 5 years, $250 million with $130 million guaranteed. They're saying they offered that, or at least it's being reported that. The idea that everyone who's as good as Deshaun Watson, who signed for $230 million guaranteed with the Browns, should get that. If that becomes a new norm, then I don't know where things go. I know if I'm Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen or, Joe Burrow, I'm going, sign me up.
All right. First of all, like, a lot to unpack. I don't know if it's that big of a disaster. I think it's the off season, also, aka the silly season of the NFL. you got guys working out in shorts. Cam Newton threw the ball, last week or whatever, and everyone's like, Cam is back. I'm like, he's throwing in shorts in an arena with nobody coming at him. Yeah. Like, last time we saw him with the Patriots, he literally looked like he had no idea how to throw a forward pass. Like, stop. Cam Newton, at his best, was hard to beat and an amazing quarterback.
NFL MVP, right?
But, yes, went to a Super Bowl, but, he took a lot of abuse, and he's not the same player that he was. He could prove me wrong. Somebody could sign him. He could come in. He could have a great season. All the best. But this is silly season, right? The combine, these pro days, these workouts, it's guys running around in shorts. It's not football. It doesn't tell you anything. You got to get these guys in pads on the field, under the lights. That's the only way to figure out if somebody can play or not, right? Like, you can have all your metrics. And some of those metrics have proved out to be very, very good indicators of a player's ability. But most of those are derived from their play on the field. Then they do their actual measurements and compare the two. All this pro day bullshit and 40 time and all that other stuff don't fucking matter. So, one, it's silly season. Two, and with silly season comes like, well, we don't have games to talk about or records or playoffs or Super Bowls, so they talk about everything else, right? And so I think that's a part of what's driving it. Now, as for Lamar Jackson, him not having an agent and what he said, like, look, I mean, Aaron Rodgers has got, like, quarterbacks and people with contract disputes who have them all the time. Team says one thing, player and his agent say another thing. Lamar doesn't have an agent, so that's a whole other issue that people are like, well, you have to have an agent and blah, blah. No, you don't. There have been plenty of players who have negotiated their own contracts successfully for large contracts. Player just did it, offensive lineman.
Tunsil?
I didn't
know he did that. But.
Yeah, Tunsil just did it with Houston. Like, did his own deal. Another player did it as well this year. It's not really. It's not. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's not something we've never seen before. And they when guys do that, they decide to go on their own. They have the support of the NFLPA, the Players Union. They've got plenty of resources. They got plenty of lawyers that they can talk to. They can figure it out. So him not having an agent, like, people really want to bag on that. I think my only question is how is he contacting teams? How are they contacting him? Are they directly talking to him, the player? Does he have some sort of intermediary doing that sort of contact for him? But again, it's not that big of a deal one way or another. And then as it relates to Deshaun Watson, you brought up Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen. Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen both actually signed big contracts, but they were really team friendly, right? Because they wanted to make sure, like, Pat Mahomes even came out and said, like, look, I'm really, really rich already, and I'm going to be, but I want to make sure that they've got the resources to keep a good team around me so we can keep winning. Josh Allen basically came out, same sort of thing. Yeah. Tom Brady did it for years. So there's that component of it, right? But then there's also, like, look, NFL players for a long time didn't get guaranteed contracts, and given the brutality of the sport, didn't have long careers. Lamar Jackson has been hurt the last 2 seasons and hasn't been able to finish the season. Has missed a lot of games, and the bigger issue, I think, for me with Lamar Jackson is that, right? Like, listen, I think if he were able to finish the last 2 seasons, one, the Ravens probably get a lot further. They beat the Bengals this year in the playoffs, and who knows, maybe they get to the Super Bowl, maybe not, but they probably get further in the playoffs. Because you're talking about a player who's been the league MVP. You're talking about a player who's just amazingly dynamic. A guy who has single-handedly won games for the Ravens. A guy that's a huge part of their success. When he's on the field, they're good. When he's not, they're not. And so his value really, I don't think, can be understated when you look at everything that he brings to the table. But the injuries are the biggest thing. I don't think it's just about race. I don't think this is as much about Deshaun Watson as people are saying it is. I think it comes down to, I don't even think it's about his ability to play, right? Someone tried to argue, well, I don't think Lamar Jackson's that good. I'm like, well, his record when he's on the fucking field says otherwise.
I believe he's 45-16 as a starter, and they're 3-9 without him.
Right.
Something around those, that's ballpark accurate.
With an MVP, he's been to the playoffs. Yeah, he's only got one playoff win, but, I mean, we could talk about plenty of really, really good quarterbacks who, struggled in the playoffs, and Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. what's his name? John Elway didn't get his until the last 2 years of his career.
Thanks for not bringing Jim Kelly into this.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Well, yeah. I mean, but point being is that I don't think this is about Lamar Jackson's skill. I think it comes down to because of his skill set and the way he plays and the fact that he hasn't been there the last 2 seasons. At the end of the season, when they needed him most, which could impact his team's ability to go on, possibly to a Super Bowl, that is the big part. Now, are there teams that are saying, look, the Deshaun Watson contract was ridiculous. I think that needs to be quelled, and we're not going to do it. So we're not even going to entertain it, and hopefully he dials it back. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's, the fraternity of the owners of the NFL who were all pissed at Jimmy Haslam. Jimmy Haslam said, I don't give a fuck. I want this guy because I think he's that good. I think there's plenty of that going around, right? And, I think it is odd that some of these teams that do need a quarterback haven't taken a stab at him. The Carolinas, I think even Atlanta, because if you look at what the Browns did, they had Baker Mayfield and they said, fuck Baker, we want Deshaun because we think he's better, even with the baggage that he brings. And people are looking at that and saying, well, why isn't someone doing that for Lamar Jackson? It's got to be either because, they're pissed off about Deshaun or they're, because of his race or because of the injuries or whatever. All those are decent arguments, I guess. But I think really the biggest thing that comes down to is, do you want to pay a guy guaranteed money who for the last 2 years has not been able to finish the season and you are worried about injury because of his build? Now, his argument is like, look, I didn't get hurt running. I got hurt because our offensive line let guys through and I got injured in the pocket, right? Which I think, is a decent argument, except, well, yeah, but you still got hurt and you couldn't play. I don't care if even if you're a fucking statue, if you're repeatedly hurt multiple times because you can't play. But then I guess they could punch back and say, well, Jimmy Garoppolo keeps getting paid, and that dude, when's the last time he's played 16 games, right? And I think the last time he did play most of the season, they did go to a Super Bowl. But Jimmy Garoppolo spends a lot of time hurt. But Jimmy Garoppolo also isn't asking for $50 million.
He's got a 3-year deal for $30 million, which try to trivialize $30 million a year.
Well,
sounds funny,
look,
but it's not $200 million guaranteed.
Exactly, and so it comes down to now. I've heard in the NFL circles that look, if Lamar came down to $30 million for 3 years guaranteed, or even $40 million 3 years guaranteed, then multiple teams would be tripping over themselves to get to him. I don't know how true that is, whether he would accept that or whether the teams would want to come after him for that type of money. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens because, like you said, they franchise tagged him. So if another team doesn't come, he's going to be slated to pay for the Ravens next year.
If another team does come, they can match. So
exactly.
Non-exclusive.
Now, that's the other thing that I heard.
Drama there.
The other thing that I heard as well, part of the reason why teams aren't going after him is because they're just like, why waste the time? Because the Ravens can match, right? Yeah. Like it's not like we go through all this to.
And if we come to a deal, we owe him all that money, and the Ravens get our next 2 first-round draft picks.
I think the draft picks are. I think they're more concerned about just the Ravens being able to match and being able to keep him. Right, and it's just like, so you do the negotiating for the Ravens that they don't want to do, and then they keep the player, and you've wasted time with it. And I think there's a huge. I think that's a huge component to it as well. Like, why the fuck would I want to do the negotiating for them? Yeah. Screw them.
And I think that's why the Ravens were I'm going to use the word smart. Like, you know what? This is getting ugly. We'll let other teams handle this nonsense.
Yeah, or nobody will handle it, and then he ends up playing for us next year. Because
the question is the bad guys,
right? And then the question is, does Lamar sit out next year if another team doesn't come into the picture? And that's a question that only Lamar can answer. I don't think he has to this point, and I think that he would play because our most recent example. Yeah, I mean, our most recent example of that did not work out well for Le'Veon Bell. He ended up getting a big contract with the Jets, but he ended up getting cut 2 years later. And it didn't work out. And Le'Veon Bell was a receiver, or running back, kind of receiver for the Steelers, but in a completely different situation. But it's still worth noting that Le'Veon Bell did, get franchised multiple times, chose to sit out the second time. It didn't work out all that well. You can look at the reasons why.
For anyone involved, by the way. Le'Veon Bell didn't work out well for him, didn't work out well for the Steelers.
Kind of, sort of. I mean, you end up with Najee Harris, right? And I think Najee's really good. He was, once he got healthy last year, it was really effective. His rookie year was really effective. So, I think the Steelers are kind of like, well, we would have loved to keep you, but you decided to dick around, and they moved on. But it didn't work out great for Bell or the Jets for sure. Steelers, I think, are debatable overall. But, Lamar Jackson, I think, probably ends up playing for the Ravens next year. And then ends up because there's no way they would be dumb enough to franchise tag him twice. Why? What's the point? Right? But also I think Lamar would be crazy not to play under the franchise tag as a quarterback because now look, if I were Lamar Jackson, you know who I'd be on the phone with?
Go ahead.
The man that nobody wants, Kirk Cousins. Because listen, here's why. Kirk Cousins has played this.
Kirk Cousins has been a discussion point for you and I for so long.
This system so well. Think about it. He took Kirk Cousins said, "You gonna franchise tag me and pay me guaranteed $35 million? Great. You're gonna franchise me again and pay me $40 million? Okay, cool." Then he takes his show. He goes to Minnesota. Give me a short 2-year deal for cool $90 million or whatever it was. Right? And then it's like, all right, I played those 2 years. No, let's do another one for $102 million. Right? Kirk Cousins, in his career, right, him and Robert Griffin come in the same draft, right, to the same team.
The same team, yeah.
Right? And Kirk Cousins has made $300 million as a player, and this is a guy that no one ever wants on their team. If I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm like, Kirk, talk to me, fam. What do I do here? And Kirk's going to be like, well, buddy, I'll tell you what. I would play under the franchise tag this year. I would play under the franchise tag next year. And when you become a free agent, because they can't tag you again, I would go get a short deal for X amount of dollars, and then I would do it again. And I don't know if you got a good argument against it.
We've had this discussion 20 times, you and I. Like, is Kirk Cousins worth that money? Fuck no. He's getting paid it, though.
You look at the numbers. When you look at the numbers with Kirk Cousins, it's like,
yeah, exactly. And we've said, you and I have had this conversation, like, do you want this guy as when the Bills were looking for a quarterback, when the Steelers were looking to replace Ben, it was like, this guy's got the numbers. Do you want him?
No.
Nah.
But, he's getting paid. He's good at throwing the football. He's getting paid. His teams are always competitive. They're in the hunt.
Yeah.
It's just like, if there's something to it, because it's one thing if you're a running back, right? If you get franchised as a running back, that money is $8, $9, $10 million, whatever it is.
Yeah, about that.
Whole different thing at quarterback. You're talking about because it's the top average of the top 5.
Right.
Right? Like, so you look at these quarterbacks. So now, this is the other part. Deshaun Watson's deal fucks that all up.
True.
Right? And then you got Aaron Rodgers' deal, and then you got got Mahomes, and Kirk Cousins in there.
Yeah.
So your guaranteed money is going to be over $30, $35 million. And I get the whole you don't want to leave money on the table, you want the long-term deal. But let me tell you, right? Like, $10 million, yes, is a lot of money. But compared to $30 million, that's a whole lot of me. Between $30 and $40 million guaranteed. Right, taking the average of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, and then, by the way, if he plays under the franchise tag the second year, right, it goes up. Like, I think it goes up 14-15% on top of what you got the previous franchise year, right? Like, so maybe there's something to play under the franchise tag this year, play under the franchise tag next year. Then you can walk as a complete free agent, do another short-term 2-year deal. Well, you got 35, 40, you could easily be in mega millions money, right? Just playing. Now, there's the injury risk, right? If he gets hurt this year, well, look, you get hurt this year and you get hurt and they got to pay you $35 million, you're going to be all right, along with your kids and your grandkids if you play your cards right. So that's not the exact end of the world. But it's just worth considering. And people would argue like, well, Kirk Cousins is a pocket quarterback and doesn't really. I don't know if I've ever seen Kirk Cousins run out of the pocket really, or run upfield.
I'm sure he has.
But I'm sure Kirk Cousins' rushing yards are under 500 for his career. So 2 different styles of player. But worth considering given the money that quarterbacks get under the franchise tag.
I think you're making sense. I'll be very curious to see what happens to them. I think Baltimore tried to save themselves the headache of, if we try to negotiate with you one-on-one under an exclusive franchise tag, we have no leverage. If you want to go out there and look for a better deal, when you find out, there isn't necessarily a better deal out there for you, well, then coming back home doesn't sound so bad. I would love to see, there's been rumors that Lamar Jackson's going to get traded to Washington. I would love it. Get that guy out of the AFC because he's a dangerous player.
Yeah, get him out of my division.
Exactly. You got to feel the same way. I don't know where it'll go. I'll be curious, but it's just such a weird negotiating situation that it was worthy of discussion. And we've been unable to get together for a while, so we didn't get a chance to talk about it. So I'm glad we did. But in any event, we've gone way over what we normally intend to. If you want to close out with something, great. If not, we are at Whiskey Congress on Instagram and Twitter. Your thoughts?
Yes, we are on Twitter at Whiskey Congress.
And we're done. We're out. Thank you.